Welcome to Sniper's Rest. Sniper's Rest is the last best rest stop in the here and there, the place between where you're coming from and where you're going. I am Sniper Shadow and I reside here in Sniper's Rest as a guide and a custodian to those who pass through here. I visit the worlds within the multiverse often, but I am always here to guide and care for travelers such as yourself that pass through the here and there. Welcome, my friend. I hope you are well today. Yes, I'm over the goblin cough now. Fighting fit and ready for anything. Thank you for asking, my friend. I appreciate you. I'll see if I can rustle up your usual, and hey, as always, please take a rest here before continuing your journey. Today we continue reading the series of short stories by H.P. Lovecraft. The Rats and the Wolves is the next story we will be reading. It was written in September 1923 and first published in the March 1924 issue of Weird Tales. Let us begin. On July 16, 1923, I moved into Exham Priory, after the last workman had finished his labours. The restoration had been a stupendous task, for little had remained of the deserted pile but shell-like ruin, yet because it had been the seat of my ancestors, I let no expense deter me. The place had not been inhabited since the reign of James I, when a tragedy of intensely hideous, though largely unexplained nature, had struck down the master, 5 of his children, and several servants, and driven forth under a cloud of suspicion and terror the 3rd son, my lineal progenitor, and the only survivor of the abhorred line. With this sole heir denounced as a murderer, the estate had been reverted to the crown, nor had the accursed man made any attempt to encapsulate himself or regain his property. Shaken by some horror greater than that of the coincidence or law, and expressing only the frantic wish to exclude the ancient edifice from his sight and memory, Walter Delapore, 11th Baron, Exham to Virginia, and their founded family, by which the next century had become known as Delapore. Exham Priory had remained untenanted, though later allotted to the estates of Norrie's family, and much studied because of its peculiar composite architecture, an architecture involving Gothic towers, resting on a Saxon and Romanesque substructure, whose foundation was in turn of a still earlier order, or blend of orders, Roman and even Druidic, or native Cymric, if legends speak truly. This foundation was a very singular thing, being merged on the side of the solid limestone of precipice, from whose brink the priory overlooked a desolate valley 3 miles west of the village of Ancestral. Architects and antiquarians loved to examine this strange relic of forgotten centuries, but the country folk hated it. They hated it hundreds of years before, when my ancestors lived there, and they hated it now. With the moss and mould of abandonment on it, I had not been a day in Ancestral before I knew I came of an accursed home. And this week the workmen have blown up Exham Priory and are busy obliterating traces of its foundations. The bare statistics of my ancestry I had always known, together with the fact that my first American forebearer had come to the colonies under a strange cloud. Of details, however, I had been kept wholly ignorant through policy of reticence, always maintained by the Delapores. Unlike our planter neighbors, we seldom boasted of crusading ancestors or other medieval and Renaissance heroes, nor was any kind of tradition handed down, except what may have been recorded in the sealed envelope before the Civil War by every squire to his eldest son for posthumous opening. The glories were cherished were those achieved since the migration, glories of a proud and honorable, if somewhat reserved and unsocial Virginia line. During the war, our fortunes were extinguished and our whole existence changed by the burning of Carfax, our home on the banks of the James. My grandfather, advanced in years, had perished in that incendiary outrage, and with him the envelope that bound us all to the past. I can recall that fire today, as I saw it there at the age of 7, with the federal soldiers shouting, the women screaming, and everyone howling and praying. My father was in the army defending Richmond, and after many formalities, my mother and I were passed through the lines to join him. When the war ended, we all moved north, whence my mother had come, and I grew into manhood, middle age, and ultimate wealth as a stolid Yankee. Neither my father nor I ever knew our hereditary envelope had contained, and as I merged into the greyness of Massachusetts business life, I lost all interest in the mysteries which evidently lurked far back in the family tree. I'd suspected their nature. How gladly I would have left Exham Priory to its moss, bats, and cobwebs. My father died in 1904, but without any message to leave me, or to my only child Alfred, a motherless boy of 10. It was this boy who reserved the order of the family information, for although I could give him only jesting conjectures about the past, he wrote me some of very interesting ancestral legends when the late war took him to England in 1917 as an aviation officer. Apparently, the Delapores had a colourful and perhaps sinister history, for a friend of my son's, Captain Edward Norreys of the Royal Flying Corps, dwelt near the family seat at Archester, and related some of the peasant superstitions which few novelists could equal for wildness and incredibility. Norreys himself, of course, did not take them seriously, but they amused my son and made good material for his letters to me. It was this legendary which definitely turned my attention to my transatlantic heritage, and made me resolve to purchase and restore the family seat which the Norreys shewed to Alfred in its picturesque dissertation, and offered to get for him at a surprisingly reasonable figure, since his uncle was the present owner. I bought Exham Priory in 1918, but was almost immediately distracted from my plans of restoration by the return of my son. During the 2 years he lived, I thought nothing but his care. I have even placed my business under the direction of partners. In 1921, as I found myself bereaved and aimless as a retired manufacturer no longer young, I resolved to divert my remaining years to my new possession. Visiting Anchester in December, I was entertained by Captain Norreys, a plump, amiable young man, who had thought much of my son, and secured his assistance in gathering plans and antidotes to guide the coming restoration. Exham Priory itself saw without emotion. A jumble of tottering medieval ruins, covered with lichens and honeycombed rooks' nests, perched perilously upon a precipice, and denuded of floors or other interior features save the stone walls of the separate towers. As I gradually recovered the image of the edifice as it had been when my ancestors left it over 3 centuries before, I began to hire workmen for the reconstruction. In every case, I was forced to go outside the immediate locality, for Anchester villagers had an almost unbelievable fear and hatred of the place. The sentiment was so great that it was sometimes communicated to the outside labourers, causing numerous desertions, whilst its scope appeared to include both the priory and its ancient family. My son had told me that he was somewhat avoided during his visits because he was a Delapore, and now I find myself subtly ostracized for a like reason, until I convinced the peasants how little I knew of my heritage. Even then they sullenly disliked me, so that I had to collect most of the village traditions through the mediation of Norreys. What the people could not forgive, perhaps, was that I had come to restore a symbol so abhorrent to them, for, rationally or not, they viewed Exham Priory as nothing less than a haunt of fiends and werewolves. Piecing together the tales which Norrie collected for me, and supplementing them with accounts of several savants who studied the ruins, I deduced that Exham Priory stood on the site of a prehistoric temple, a druid or anti-druid thing, which must have been contemporary with Stonehenge. That indescribable rites had been celebrated there, few doubted, and there were some unpleasant tales of the transference of these rites in the Cybele workshop the Romans had introduced. Inscriptions still visible in the subcellar bore such unmistakable letters as Div Ops Magna Mat, the sign of the Magna Mater, whose dark worship was vainly forbidden to Roman citizens. Anchester had been the camp of the 3rd Augustan Legion, and many remains attest, and it was said that the temple of Cybele was splendid and thronged with worshippers who performed nameless ceremonies at the bidding of the Phrygian priest. Tales added that the fall of the old religion did not end the orgies at the temple, but that the priests lived on a new faith without real change. Likewise, it was said that the rites did not vanish with the Roman power, and that certain among the Saxons added to what remained of the temple, and gave it an essential outline it subsequently preserved, making the center of the cult feared through half a heresy. About 1000 A.D., the place was mentioned in a chronicle as being a substantial stone priory housing a strange, powerful monastic order, and surrounded by extensive gardens which needed no walls to exclude the frightened populace. It was never destroyed by the Danes, though after Norman conquest it must have declined tremendously, since there was no impediment when Henry III granted the site to my ancestor Gilbert Delapore, 1st Baron of Exham in 1261. Of my family before this date there is no evil report, but something strange must have happened then. In one chronicle there is a reference to Delapore as cursed of God in 1307, whilst village legendary had nothing but evil and frantic fear to tell of the castle that went up on the foundations of the old temple and priory. The fireside tales of most grisly descriptions, all the ghastlier because of their frightened reticence and cloudy evasiveness. They represented my ancestors as a race of hereditary daemons, besides whose Gilly de Retz and Marquis de Sade would seem the veriest of tyros, and hinted whisperingly that at their responsibility for the occasional disappearance of villagers through several generations. The worst characters apparently were the barons and their direct heirs, at least most was whispered about these. If of healthier inclinations, it was said an heir would early and mysteriously die to make way for another, more typical scion. There seems to be an inner cult in the family presided over by the head of the house, and sometimes closed except to a few members. Temperament, rather than ancestry, was evidently the basis of this cult, for it was entered by several who married into the family. Lady Margaret Tever of Cornwall, wife of Godfrey and the second son of the 5th Baron, became a favourite bane of children all over the countryside, and the daemon heroine of a particularly horrible old ballad, yet not extinct near the Welsh border. Preserved in balladry too, if not illustrating the same point, is the hideous tale of Lady Marie Delapore, who shortly after her marriage to the Earl of Shrewsfield was killed by him and his mother, both slayers of being absolved and blessed by the priest, who confessed they dared not repeat to the world. These myths and ballads, typically as they were of crude superstition, repelled me greatly. Their persistence and their application to so long a line of my ancestors were especially annoying, whilst the impulsations of monstrous habits proved unpleasantly reminiscent of one known of scandal of my immediate forebears, the case of my cousin, young Randolph Delapore of Carfax, who went among the natives and became a voodoo priest after he returned from the Mexican War. I am much less disturbed the vaguer of tales of wails and howlings in the barren wind-swept valley beneath the limestone cliff, of the graveyard stenches after spring rains, of the floundering, squealing white thing on which Sir John Clave's horse had trod one night in a lonely field, and of the servant who had gone mad at what he saw in the priory in the full light of day. These things were Hacken's spectral lore, and I was, at a time, pronounced sceptic. The accounts of vanished peasants were less to be dismissed, though not especially significant in the view of medieval custom. Prying curiosity meant death, and more than one severed head had been publicly shewn on bastions now effaced around Exham Priory. A few of the tales were exceedingly picturesque, and made me wish I had learnt more comparative mythology in my youth. There was, for instance, a belief that the legion of bat-winged devils kept witches' Sabbath each night at Priory, a legion whose substance might explain the disproportionate abundance of coarse vegetables harvested in the vast gardens, and the vivid of all was the dramatic epic of the rats, scampering armies of obscene vermin which had burst forth from the castle 3 months after tragedy that doomed the desolation, and the lean, filthy, ravenous army which had swept all before it and devoured fowl, cats, dogs, hogs, sheep, and even 2 hapless human beings before its fury was spent. Around that unforgettable rodent army a whole separate cycle of myths revolves, for it scattered among village homes and brought curses and horrors in its train. Such was the lore that assailed me as I pushed to completion, with an elderly abstiny, the work of restoring my ancestral home. It must not be imagined for a moment that these tales formed my principal psychological environment. On the other hand, I was constantly praised and encouraged by Captain Norreys and the antiquities who surrounded and aided me. The task was done over 2 years after its commencement. I viewed the great rooms, waistcoated walls, vaulted ceilings, mullioned windows, and broad staircases with pride which fully compensated for the prestigious expense of the restoration. Every attribute of the Middle Ages was cunningly reproduced, and new parts blended perfectly with the original walls and foundations. The seat of my fathers was complete, and I look forward to redeeming the last local fame of the line which ended in me. I would reside here permanently and prove that the Delapore, for I had adopted again the original spelling of the name, need not be a fiend. My comfort was perhaps augmented by the fact that though Exham Priory was medievally fitted, its interior was in truth wholly new and free from old vermin and ghosts alike. As I have said, I moved in on the 16th of July, 1923. My household consisted of 7 servants and 9 cats, of which latter species I am particularly fond. The eldest cat was 7 years old, and had come with me from my home in Bolton, Massachusetts. The others I had accumulated while living with Captain Norreys' family during the restoration of the Priory. For 5 days our routine proceeded with utmost placidity, my time being spent mostly in the codification of the old family data. I had now obtained some very circumstantial accounts of the final tragedy and flight of Walter Delapore, which I was convinced to be the probable contents of the hereditary paper lost in the fire at Carfax. It appeared that my ancestors was accursed, with much reason, of having killed all other members of his household except for 4 servant confederates in their sleep. About 2 weeks after the shocking discovery which changed his whole demeanour, but which, except my implication, he disclosed no one, save perhaps the servants who assisted him afterwards fled beyond reach. This deliberate slaughter included a father, 3 brothers, 2 sisters, and was largely condoned by the villagers, and so slack treated by the law, that its perpetrator escaped honoured and unharmed and undisguised to Virginia. The general whisper's sentiment being that he had purged the land of the curse. What discovery had prompted an act so terrible I could scarcely conjecture. Walter Delapore must have known for years the sinister tales about his family, so that this material could have given him no fresh impulse. He then witnessed something appalling, like an ancient rite, or stumbled upon some frightful and revealing symbol in the priory or its vicinity. He was reputed to have been a shy and gentle youth in England. In Virginia he seemed not so much hard or bitter as harassed and apprehensive. He was spoken of in the diary of another gentleman adventurer, Francis Hanley of Bellevue, a man of unexampled justice, honour, and delicacy. On July 22 occurred the first incident which, though lightly dismissed at the time, takes on a prenatal significance in relation to later events. It was so simple as to be almost negligible, and could not possibly have been notified under circumstances, for it must be recalled that since I was in the building particularly fresh and new, except for the walls, and surrounded by a well-balanced staff of servitors, apprehension would have been absurd despite the locality. What I afterwards remembered is merely this, that my old black cat, whose moods I know so well, was undoubtedly alert and anxious to an extent wholly out of keeping with his natural character. He roved from room to room, restless and disturbed, and sniffed constantly about the walls which formed a part of the old Gothic structure. I realize how trite this sounds, like the inevitable dog in the ghost story, which always growls before his master sees the sheeted figure, yet I cannot consistently suppress it. The following day a servant complained of restlessness among the cats in the house. He came to me in my study, a lofty west room on the second story, with a groined arches, black oak panelling, and a triple Gothic window overlooking the limestone cliff and the desolate valley. Even as he spoke, I saw the jetty form of my black cat creeping along the walls and scratching the new panels which overlaid the stone. I told the man that there must be some singular odour or emanation from the stonework, imperceptible to human sense, but affecting the delicate organs of cats, even through the new woodwork. This I truly believed, and when the fellow suggested the presence of mice or rats, I mentioned that there has been no rats there for 300 years, and that even the field mice in the surrounding country could hardly be found in these high walls, where they have never been known to stray. That afternoon I called on Captain Norreys, and he assured me that it would be quite incredible for field mice to infest a priory such a sudden and unprecedented fashion. That night, dispensing the usual valet, I retired to the west chamber, which I had chosen as my own, reached from the study by a stone staircase and a short gallery, and a former, partly ancient, and latter entirely restored. This room was circular, very high, and without wainscoting, being hung with arrays which I myself had chosen in London. Seeing that my black cat was with me, I shut the heavy door and retired by the light of the electric bulbs which so cleverly counterfeited candles, finally switching off the light and sinking into the carved and canopied four-poster, with the venerable cat in his accustomed place across my feet. I did not draw the curtains, but gazed out the north narrow window which I faced. There was a suspicion of aurora in the sky, and the delicate traceries of the window were pleasantly silhouetted. At some time I must have fallen quietly asleep, for I did recall a distinct sense of leaving strange dreams, when the cat started violently from his placid position. I saw him in the faint oriel glow, head strained forwards, 4 feet on my ankles, his hind feet stretched behind. He was looking intensely at a point on the wall somewhat west of the window, a point which to my eye had nothing to mark it, but toward which all my attention was now directed. As I watched, I knew that my cat was not vainly excited. Whether an iris actually moved, I cannot say. I think it did, very slightly. But what I can swear to is that behind it I heard a low, distinct scurrying, as of rats or mice. In a moment, the cat had jumped boldly on the screening tapestry, bringing the affected section to the floor with his weight and exposing a damp, ancient wall of stone, patched here and there by the restorers and devoid of any trace of rodent prowlers. My cat raced up and down the floor by this part of the wall, clawing the fallen arse, and seeming to try at times to insert a paw between the wall and the oaken floor. He found nothing, and after a time returned wearily to his place across my feet. I had not moved, but I did not sleep again that night. In the morning I questioned all the servants, and found that none of them had noticed anything unusual, save that the cook remembered the actions of the cat which had rested on her window-sill. This cat had howled at some unknown hour in the night, awakening the cook in time for her to see him dart purposefully out of the open door downstairs. I drowsed away at noontime, and in the afternoon called again on the Captain Norris, who became exceedingly interested in what I told him. The odd incidents, yet so slight, yet so curious, appealed to his sense of the picturesque, and elicited from him a number of reminiscences of local ghostly lore. We were genuinely perplexed at the presence of the rats, and Norrie lent me some traps and his Paris green, which I had the servants place in strategic localities when I returned. I retired early, being very sleepy, but was harassed by dreams of the most horrible sort. I seemed to be looking downwards from an immense height upon a twilight grotto, knee-deep with filth, where a white-bearded Damon swineherd drove about his staff with a flock of fungus, flabby beasts whose appearance filled me with unutterable loathing. Then, as the swineherd paused and nodded over his task, a mighty swarm of rats rained down on the stinking abyss and fell to devouring beasts and man alike. From this terrific vision I was abruptly awakened by the motions of my cat, who had been sleeping across my feet. This time I did not have to question the source of his snarls and hisses, and the fear which made him sink his claws into my ankle, unconscious of their effect, for on every single side of the chamber walls were alive with a nauseous sound, a verminous slithering of ravenous gigantic rats. There was no aura to shew the state of the arras, the fallen section which had been replaced, but I was not too frightened to turn on the light switch. The bulb leapt into radiance, and I saw a hideous shaking all over the tapestry, causing somewhat peculiar designs to execute a singular dance of death. This motion disappeared almost at once, and with the sound with it. Springing out of bed, I poked the arras with a long handle of a warming pan that rested nearby, and lifted one section to see what lay beneath. There was nothing but the patched stone wall, and even the cat had lost his tense realization of normal presences. When I examined the circular trap that had been placed in the room, I found all of the openings sprung, though no trace remained of what had been caught and had escaped. Further sleep was out of the question, so lighting a candle I opened the door and went down to the galley towards the stairs to my study, my black cat following at my heels. Before we had reached the stone steps, however, the cat darted ahead of me and vanished down the ancient flight. As I descended the stairs myself, I became suddenly aware of the sounds in the great room below. The sounds, a nature of which could not be mistaken. The oaked panel walls were alive with rats scampering down and milling, whilst my cat was racing about in a fury of baffled hunter. Reaching the bottom, I switched on the light, which did not this time cause the noise to subside. The rats continued their riot, stampeding with such force and distinctness that I could finally assign their motions to a definite direction. These creatures in numbers, apparently inexhaustible, were engaged in one stupendous migration from inconceivable heights to some depth conceivably or inconceivably below. I now heard steps in the corridor, and in another moment 2 servants pushed open the massive door. They were searching the house for some unknown source of disturbance, which had thrown all the cats into a snarling panic, and caused them to plunge perceptibly down several flights of stairs, squat, yowling before the closed door to the sub-cellar. I asked them if they had heard the rats, but they all replied in the negative, and when I turned to call their attention to the sound in the panels, I realized the sound had ceased. With the 2 men, I went down to the door of the sub-cellar, but found the cats already disappeared. Later, I resolved to explore the crypt below, but for the present, I merely made a round of the traps. All were sprung, yet all were tenantless. Satisfying myself that no one had heard the rats save the felines and me, I sat in my study till morning, thinking profoundly and recalling every scrap of legend I had unearthed concerning the building that I currently inhabited. I slept some in the forenoon, leaning back in one of the comfortable library chairs which my medieval plan of furnishing could not banish. Later, I telephoned to Captain Norris, who came over and helped me explore the sub-cellar. Absolutely nothing untoward was found, although we could not repress the thrill at the knowledge that this was the vault built by Roman hands. Every low arch and massive pillar was Roman, though not debased in Romanesque or the bungling of Saxons, with the severe and harmonious classicism of the age of the Caesars. Indeed, the walls were abound with inscriptions, familiar to antiquarians who had repeatedly explored the place. Things like Pagete, Prop, Domp, Tona, and El Preac versus Pontifi, Altus. The reference to Altus made me shiver, for I had to read Catullus, and knew something of the hideous rites of the Eastern god whose worship was so mixed with that of Cybele. Norris and I, by the light of lanterns, tried to interpret the odd and nearly Sisyphus designs on certain irregularly rectangular blocks of stone, generally held to be altars, but could not make nothing of them. We remembered that one pattern was a sort of rayed sun, was held by students to imply a non-Roman origin, suggesting that these altars had merely been adopted by the Roman priests in some older and perhaps ancient native temple on the same site. On one of these blocks were some brown stains which made me wonder. The largest in the center of the room had certain features on the uppermost surface which indicated a connection with fire, probably burnt offerings. Such were the sights in that crypt before whose door the cats had howled, and where Norris and I were now determined to pass the night. Couches were brought down by the servants, who were told not to mind any nocturnal actions of the cats, and now my black cat was admitted as for much help as for companionship. We decided to keep the great oak door, a modern replica, with slits for ventilation, tightly closed, and with this attended to, we retired with lanterns still burning to await whatever might occur. The vault was very deep in the foundations of the priory, and undoubtedly far down on the face of the beetling limestone cliff overlooking the waste valley. That it had been the goal of the scuffling and unexplainable rats, that I could not doubt, though why, I could not tell. As we lay there expectantly, I found my vigil occasionally mixed with half-deformed dreams from which uneasy motions of the cat across my feet would rouse me. These dreams were not wholesome, but horribly like the one I had had the night before. I saw the twilight grotto, and the swine-head and his unmentionable fungus beasts wallowing in filth, and as I looked at these things, they seemed nearer and more distinct, so distinct that I could almost observe their features. Then I did observe the flabby features of one of them, and awakened with such a scream that my cat started up, whilst Captain Norris, who had not slept, laughed considerable. Norris might have laughed more, or perhaps less, had he known what had made me scream. But I did not remember myself until later. Ultimate horror often paralyzes the memory in a merciful way. Norris waked me when the phenomena began. Out of the same frightful dream I was called by his gentle shaking and his urging to listen to the cats. Indeed, there was much to listen to, for beyond the closed door and the head of the stone steps was the veritable nightmare of feline yelling and clawing, whilst my cat, unmindful of his kindred outside, was running excitedly around the bare stone walls, in which I heard the same babble of scurrying rats that had troubled me the night before. An acute terror now rose within me, for here were anomalies which nothing normal could well explain. These rats, if not the creatures of madness which I shared with the cats alone, must be burrowing and sliding in the Roman walls I had thought to be of solid limestone blocks, unless perhaps the action of water, though more than 17 centuries had eaten wind tunnels in these rodent bodies, had worn clear and ample. But even so, the spectral horror was no less, for if these living vermin, why did Norrie not hear their disgusting commotion? Why did he urge me to watch the cat and listen to the cats outside? Why did he guess wildly and vaguely at what could have aroused them? By the time I had managed to tell him as rationally as I could what I thought I was hearing, my ears gave me the last fading impression of the scurrying, which had retreated still downwards further underneath the deepest of the subcellar, till it seemed as if the whole cliff below were rizzled with questing rats. Norris was not as skeptical as I had anticipated, but instead seemed profoundly moved. He motioned to me to notice that the cats at the door had ceased their clamour, as if giving up for rats for lost, whilst my cat had burst of renewed restlessness and was clawing frantically around the bottom of the large stone altar in the centre of the room, which was nearer Norrie's couch than mine. My fear of the unknown was at this point very great. Something astounding had occurred, and I saw that Captain Norris, a younger, stouter, and presumably more naturally materialistic man, was affected fully as much as myself, perhaps because of his lifelong and intimate familiarity with the local legend. We could, for a moment, do nothing but watch the old black cat as he pawed with deceasing fervour at the bottom of the altar, occasionally looking up and mewing to me in that persuasive manner which he used when he wished to perform some favour for him. Norris now took a lantern close to the altar and examined the place where my cat was pawing, silently kneeling and scraping away the lichens of centuries which joined the massive pre-Roman block of tesselled floor. He did not find anything, and was about to abandon his effort when I noticed a trivial circumstance which made me shudder, even though it implied nothing more than I had already imagined. I told him of it, and we both looked at its almost imperceptible manifestation with fixed fascination of discovery and acknowledgment. It was this, that the flame of the lantern set down near the altar was slightly, but certainly flickering from a draught of air which had not been before received, which came, undoubtedly, from the crevice between the floor and the altar, where Norris was scraping away the lichens. We spent the rest of the night in the brilliantly lighted study, nervously discussing what we should do next. The discovery that some vault deeper in the deepest known masonry of the Romans underlay this accursed pile, vault unsuspected by the curious antiquarians of 3 centuries, would have been sufficient to excite us without any background of the sinister. As it was, the fascination became twofold, and we paused in doubt whether to abandon our search and quit the Priory forever in superstitious caution, or to gratify our sense of adventure and brave whatever horrors might await us in the unknown depths. By morning we had compromised and decided to go to London to gather a group of archaeologists and scientific men fit to cope with the mystery. It should be mentioned that before leaving this subcellar, we had vainly tried to move the central altar, which now we recognized as the gate to a new pit of nameless fear. What secret would open the gate, wiser men than we would have to find. During many days in London, Captain Norris and I presented our facts, conjectures, and legendary anecdotes to 5 eminent authorities, all men who could be trusted to respect my family's disclosures, which future explanations might develop. We found most of them little disposed to scoff, but instead intensely interested and sincerely sympathetic. It is hardly necessary to name them all, but I must say that they included Sir William Brinton, whose excavations in the Trode excited most of the world in their day. And as we took the train for Anchester, I felt myself poised at the brink of frightful revelations, a sense symbolized by the air of mourning among the many Americans at the unexpected death of the president on the other side of the world. On the evening of August 7th, we reached Exham Priory, where the servants assured me that nothing unusual had occurred. The cats, even my old black cat, would have been perfectly placid, and not a trap in the house had been sprung. We were to begin exploring on the following day, awaiting which I assigned well-appointed rooms to all my guests. I myself retired to my own tower chamber with my cat across my feet. Sleep came quickly, but hideous dreams still assailed me. There was a vision of Roman feasts like Trimaco, with horror of covered platters. Then came the damnable recurrent thing about the swineherd and his filthy drove in the twilight grotto. Yet, when I awoke, it was full daylight, with normal sounds in the house below. The rats, living or spectral, had not troubled me, and the cat was quietly asleep. On going down, I found the same tranquillity had prevailed elsewhere, the condition which one of the assembled savants allowed fellow named Thornton, devoted the psychic, rather absurdly laid the fact down that I had now been shewn the thing which certain forces had wished to shew me. All was now ready, and at 11 a.m. our entire group of 7 men, bearing powerful electric searchlights, implements of excavation, went down to the sub-cellar and bolted the door behind us. My cat was with us, for the investigators found no occasion to despise his excitability, and were indeed anxious that he be present in case of obscure rodent manifestations. We noted the Roman inscriptions and unknown altar designs only briefly, for 3 of the savants had already seen them and knew all their characteristics. Prime attention was paid to the momentous centre altar, and within an hour Sir William Brinton had caused it to tilt backwards, balanced by some unknown species of counterweight. There now lay revealed such a horror as would have overwhelmed us had we not been prepared, though a nearly square opening in the tiled floor, sprawling a flight of stone steps, prodigiously worn that it was little more than an inclined plane at the centre, was a ghastly array of human or semi-human bones. Those which retained their collation as a skeleton shewed altitudes of panicked fear. All over were marks of rodents gnawing. Above the hellishly littered steps arced a descending passage seemingly chiselled from solid rock and conducting of the current air. This current was not a sudden and noxious rush from a closed vault, but a cool breeze of some freshness to it. We did not pause long, but shiveringly began to clear a passage down the steps. It was then Sir William, examining the hewn walls, made an odd observation that the passage, according to the direction of the strokes, must have been chiselled from beneath. I must be very deliberate now and choose my words. After ploughing down a few steps amidst the gnawed bones, we saw that there was a light ahead. Not any mystic phosphorescence, but a filtered daylight which could not come except from unknown fissures in the cliff that overlooked the waste valley. Such fissures had escaped notice from the outside was hardly remarkable, for not only was this valley wholly uninhabited, but the cliff is so high and beetling that only an aeronaut could study its face in detail. A few more steps, and our breaths were literally snatched from us by what we saw. So literally that Thornton, the psychic investigator, actually fainted in the arms of the dazed man who stood behind him. Norrie, his plump face utterly white and flabby, simply cried out inarticulately, whilst I think what I did was to grasp or hiss and cover my eyes. The man behind me, the only one of the party older than I, croaked and hack-eyed, "My God!" in the most cracked voice I'd ever heard. 7 cultivated men. Only Sir Brinton regained his composure, a thing more to his credit because he led the party and must have seen the sight first. In the twilight grotto of enormous height, stretching further away than any eye could see, was a subterraneous world of limitless mystery and horrible suggestion. There were buildings and other architectural remains. In one terrified glance, I saw a weird pattern of tumuli, the circle of monoliths, low-domed in Roman ruin, sprawling Saxon pile, an early English edifice of wood. But all these were dwarfed by the ghoulish spectacle presented by this general surface of the ground. For yards about the steps extended insane tangle of human bones, or bones at least as human as those on the steps. Like the foamy sea, they stretched, some fallen apart, but others wholly or partially articulated as skeletons. These latter in variable postures, a demonic fury of either fighting off some menace or clutching other forms with cannibal intent. When Dr. Trask, the anthropologist, stooped to classify the skulls, he found a degraded mixture which utterly baffled him. They were mostly lower than the Piltdown man of the scale of evolution, but in every case definitely human. Many were of higher grade, and few of the skulls were of supremely and sensitively developed types. All of the bones were gnawed, mostly by rats, but somewhat by others of the half-human drove. Mixed with them were many tiny bones of rats, fallen members of the lethal army which closed the ancient epic. I wonder that any man among us lived and kept his sanity through that hideous day of discovery. Not Hoffman nor Humas could conceive a scene more wildly incredible, more frantically repellent, or more gothically grotesque than the twilight grotto through which we seven staggered, each stumbling on a revelation after revelation, and trying to keep, for the nonce, from thinking the events which must have taken place in this place 300 years before, or 1,000, or even 2,000, or 10,000 years ago. It was the antechamber of hell, and the poor Thornton fainted again when Trask told him that some of the skeleton things must have descended as quadrupeds, though the last 20 or more generations. Horror piled on horror as we began to interpret the architectural remains. The quadruped things, with their occasional recruits from the bipedal class, had been kept in stone pens out of which they must have broken in their last delirium of hunger or rat fear. There had been great herds of them, evidently fattened on the coarse vegetables whose remains could be found in some sort of poisonous ensilage at the bottom of the stone bins older than Rome. I knew now why my ancestors had had such excessive gardens. Would to heaven I could forget. The purpose of the herds I did not have to ask. Sir William, standing with his searchlight in the Roman ruin, translated aloud the most shocking ritual I have ever known, and told of the diet of the antediluvian cult, in which the priests of Cybele found and mingled with their own. Norrie, as used to as he was to the trenches, could not walk straight when he came out of the English building. It was a butcher shop and kitchen. He had expected that, but was too much to see English implements in such a place, and to read familiar English graffiti there, some as recent as 1610. I could not go into that building whose daemon activities were stopped only by the dagger of my ancestor Walter Delapore. What I did venture to enter was the low Saxon building whose oaken doors had fallen, and there I found a terrible row of 10 stone cells with rusty bars. 3 had tenants, all skeletons of high grade, and on the bony forefinger of one I found a seal ring of my own coat of arms. Sir William found a vault, far older cells, below the Roman chapel, but these cells were empty. Below them was a low crypt of cases of formality arranged bones. Some of them were bearing terrible parallel inscriptions, carved in Latin, Greek, and the tongue of Phrygia. Meanwhile, Dr. Trask had opened one of the prehistoric tumuli and brought to light skulls which were slightly more human than a gorilla's, and one which bore an indescribable ideograph carvings. Through all this horror, my cat stalked unperturbed. Once I saw him monstrously perched atop a mountain of bones, and wondered at the secrets that might lie behind his yellow eyes. Having grasped to some slight degree the frightful revelations of this twilight area, an area so hideously foreshadowed by my recurrent dream, we turned to that apparently boundless depth of midnight cavern where no ray of light from the cliff could penetrate. We shall never know what sightless Stygian worlds yawn beyond the little distance we went, for it was decided that such secrets are not good for mankind. But there was plenty to engross us close at hand, for we had not gone far before the searchlight shewed that accursed infinity of pits in which rats had festered, and whose sudden lack of replenishment had driven them ravenous, the rodent army first to turn to the living herds of starving things, and then burst forth from a priory in that historic orgy of devastation which the peasants will never forget. God, those carrion black pits of sword-picked bones and opened skulls, those nightmare chasms choked with pythiopods, Celtic, Roman, and English bones of countless unhallowed centuries. Some of them were full, and none I can say how deep that they had once been. Others were bottomless to our searchlights, and peopled by unnameable fancies. What I thought of the hapless rats that stumbled into traps amidst the blackness of their quests in this grisly Tartarus. Once my foot slipped near a horribly yawning brink, and I have a moment of ecstatic fear. I must have been musing for a long time, for I could not see any of the party but Captain Norris. Then there came a sound from that inky, boundless, farther distance that I thought I knew. I saw my old black cat dart past me like a winged Egyptian god, straight into the unlimitable gulf of the unknown. But I was not far behind, for there was no doubt after another second that it was the eldritch scurrying of those fiend-born rats, always questing for new horrors and determined to lead me on even unto those grinning caverns of earth's centre. The mad, faceless god howls blindly to the piping of the amphimorious idiot flute players. My searchlight expired, but I still ran. I heard voices and yowls and echoes, but above all, there gently rose that impious, insidious, scurrying, gently rising, as stiff, bloated corpses gently rise above an oily river that flows under endless onyx bridges to a black, putrid sea. Something bumped into me. Something soft and plumped. It must have been the rats, the vicious, gelatinous, ravenous army feasting on the dead and the living. Why shouldn't rats eat the Delapores, as the Delapores eat forbidden things? The war ate my boy, damn them all, and the Yanks ate Carafax with flames and burnt down Grandsire Delapore and the secret. No, no, I tell you, I am not that Damon swineherd in the twilight grotto. It was not Edward Norrie's fat face on that flabby fungus thing. Who am I to say I am a Delapore? He lived, but my boy died. Shall Honorius hold the land of the Delapore? It's voodoo, I tell you, that spotted snake. Curse you, Thornton, I'll teach you to faint at what my family do. So blood thou stinked, I'll learn how ye to gust. Woulden ye swanks me. Thaikwas. Manga mata atis da ad akana ad odan akaspas durak ot. Denosas au dolora at akas lasa ngla rakacha. This is what they say, I said, when they found me in the blackness after 3 hours. They found me crouching in the blackness over the plump, half-eaten body of Captain Norris, with my own cat leaping and tearing at my throat. Now they have blown up Exham Priory and taken my cat away from me, and shut me in this barred room at the Harnwell with fearful whispers about my hereditary and experiences. Thornton is in the next room, but they prevent me from talking to him. They are trying to suppress most of the facts concerning the Priory. When I did speak of poor Norris, they accused me of hideous things, but they must know I did not do it. They must know it was the rats. The slithering, scurrying rats whose scampering will never let me sleep. The demon rats that race behind the padding in this room, that beckon me down to greater horrors than I have ever known. The rats that they can never hear. The rats in the walls.
That concludes our tale for this week, my friend. Please return next week and we will continue with another short story by H.P. Lovecraft. If you wish to rest some more, please find a space that suits you. Whether you curl up by the fire, partake in some food and beverages in our kitchen, take a nap in one of our many rooms, or take a stroll around the garden, please know you are always welcome at Sniper's Rest, my friend. If you are continuing your journey, the multiverse contains so much for you to explore this week. To the north, Grandfather's on a mission to find everyone's pets. Please help him as he searches these wonderful miniature worlds and solves the puzzles to find our animal friends. To the west, in a world where everyone you speak to might not be strictly human, what do? Every choice, every tiny thing means a new ending for everyone. So what will you choose? To the east, you've bought a house, and that house has a garden, and that garden has treasure, and we have a shovel. I think you can guess what we're doing today. I am a dwarf and I'm digging a hole, diggy diggy hole, digging a hole. And if you are making your own way out there, good luck, my friend, wherever you end up, wherever you come from, and wherever you're going. Thank you for spending some time here with us at Sniper's Rest. Remember to take care of yourself, be kind to others, hydrate, take a moment to look out into the world and marvel at how incredible it all is. How incredible you are, friend. Until next time, please take care on your way.